Number 8. Gotham Season 2. Well, as usual, bringing up the rear of our TV season's Best of the Year list, it's Gotham. Now, I usually rewatch each series binge style, but this is the only show I'm doing a season review of without giving it a rewatch. No way am I putting myself through that torture again. So if I forget a certain couple of points I should make, just bear with me. Now, to be fair, in many ways, I think this season was an improvement from last season. It opened real strong. I enjoyed the early portion of the season with the introduction to Theodore Gallivan, played by James Frain. And as I mentioned in my season premiere video, I really like Frain. I think he's a great character actor who's made to order for a villain in a comic book series like this. He and his hot sister Tabitha, played by Jessica Lucas, who strangely looks nothing alike, come to Gotham to settle an old score. Ooh, mystery. He gets a bunch of Arkham inmates to do his bidding, including Jerome from last season, and he was a great character. I'm of the opinion that you shouldn't ever know the Joker's past, but there was no need to kill Jerome off. He was easily one of the most enjoyable villains in the series, and you could have left it vague as to whether or not he would have become the actual Joker. All that matters is that, for all intents and purposes, he was the series Joker. But they killed him off anyway. Such a waste. They also brought back Barbara, as crazy as a loon. It's really remarkable where she went from being one of the most hated characters last season to being one of my favorite characters this season. She was just great, and you can tell the actress Erin Richards really takes to the role more now as a wacko than she did playing the girlfriend. It's like they also tried to make her this universe's equivalent of Harley Quinn. So Sarah Essen dies, which is no big deal since they weren't going to make her and Jim a couple in this universe. And Captain Barnes, played by Michael Chiklis, is brought in to replace her. I really like Chiklis from his portrayal of the Thing back in the day, and playing this kind of tough-as-nails cop is made to order for him. He originally looked to be something of a mentor to Jim before the season soon deteriorated. More on that later. They really gave Ed the lion's share of development this season, which was alright since I enjoy Corey Michael Smith's take on the character. His descent into madness, as it were, over the accidental killing of the object of his affection, Miss Kringle, was kind of a disappointment to me, though. I'd have preferred if Miss Kringle became as demented as he and became his partner or something. The Bruce Wayne side of things was okay for the first half of the season, too. I loved the introduction of Silver St. Cloud into the series, played very aptly by Natalie Alyn Lind. I like the triangle of sorts between she, Bruce, and Selina. It also played very well into Bruce's abilities as a tactician, as he plans a clever ruse to expose what Silver knows about Bruce's parents' killer. I don't remember Silver ever being villainous in the comics, but apart from that, it was a very clever subplot. Gallivan's big plan is to sacrifice Bruce Wayne for the crimes the Wayne family perpetrated on his family over a century ago. Selina herself doesn't get too much spotlight this year. The most is the Firefly arc in the first half of the season, where classic Batman villain Firefly is reimagined as a teenage girl who was friends with Selina. I was hoping they'd delve a bit into Selina's backstory with her mom this year, but maybe they're holding off on that for down the line. Bruce also runs off with Selina to learn the ropes of the criminal underworld, but that only lasts like 2 episodes. Penguin gets brushed aside somewhat this season. He has an axe to grind against Gallivan, the newly elected mayor of Gotham, for killing his revered mother. This is where the season goes downhill, right at the mid-season break, as they let Gordon execute Gallivan out of the clear blue. It's completely at odds with the entire premise of the show. Gordon is supposed to be the sole altruistic cop in Gotham, and now he's taking the law into his own hands by executing Gallivan? Now, it would be one thing if he's held accountable for this somehow, but he gets clean away with it, only to be framed by Ed, who is afraid Jim's going to find out he killed Miss Kringle, framing him for killing another cop. It's the most nonsensical, convoluted, unnecessary plot. So we have to go through Gordon going to prison and breaking out of prison with the help of a cameoing Carmine Falcone. It was just the most agonizing stretch of episodes I ever had to sit through in my life, probably topping last season's second half with Fish Mooney on the island. We have Gordon acting completely out of character. He's no longer a cop. It's just, ugh. I came so close to dropping this show again this year, and I have to question why I subject myself to this anymore. Anyway, it didn't get much better in the second half of the season, but one of the few bright spots was the Mr. Freeze arc. Although I don't get why they thought it was clever to pronounce it Fries. If he had a flamethrower, it would be Fries, but with a freeze gun, it should be Freeze. Anyway, I dug the way they handled his story here. The only thing is here, Freeze is already a cold-hearted killer long before the accident, so there's no real transformation from good to evil here. But it's pretty close to classic Freeze otherwise. He's still trying to cure his wife Nora. And the actor playing Freeze, Nathan Darrow, was just perfect. His look as Freeze was great too, though I'd have preferred him to have blue skin. The only other bright spot in the second half was B.D. Wong as Hugo Strange. He really brought an enjoyably nuanced performance to what could have been an otherwise dull character. After torturing Penguin, who took the fall for Galavan's death, into supposed normalcy, Strange releases Penguin back into the world where he meets his father, played by Paul Reubens, aka Pee Wee Herman, in his highly publicized return to the character he played in the prologue to Batman Returns. I liked his portrayal, and both actors played off each other very well, but it's basically a time waster that only serves to have Penguin abused again, bringing him back to his morbidly murderous ways. Eventually, Bruce meets up with Matches Malone, his parents' killer, with the intention to kill him. Bruce finds he can't do it, and Malone offs himself instead. It's not my preferred way of resolving that storyline, but it was fairly effective. So Strange ends up being tasked by what we find out later is the Court of Owls to bring the dead back to life. And guess what? He succeeds! He brings Galavan back and with some brainwashing rechristens him Azrael. Yes, that Azrael, like from the comics. It's a good chance for Frayne to chew the scenery, but he's quickly taken out. How? What is that? Is that a bazooka? He also succeeds in bringing Fish Mooney back, now with the power of persuasion late in the season. I almost expected them to kill her off at the end of the episode as a gag, but unfortunately it looks like they're holding Fish over for a return run next year. Along with all of this, Strange's Arkham is being used as a breeding ground for virtually all of Batman's villains, in a move not unlike the plans from the Amazing Spider-Man franchise to introduce all of Spidey's villains through Oscorp. They introduced Basil Carlo, the Golden Age Clayface, in the final episode, as he masquerades as Jim Gordon, which was admittedly very funny. They also suggest that Mad Hatter and Killer Croc are possible to appear next year, as well as an apparent clone of young Bruce Wayne. Just to wrap up a few loose ends, Butch Gilzean is still around. They kind of dropped the entire mob angle this season in favor of the Rise of the Freaks, but he's still a cool remnant of the first season. He loses his hand, but gains Galavan's sister Tabitha by the end of the season. It's very disappointing that Harvey Bullock also takes a backseat for much of the season. His witty rejoinders were a highlight of Season 1. I was happy to see his girlfriend from the first season, Scotty, come back for an episode, but they quickly forgot her again. Monica Baccarin's Leslie Tompkins gets a reprieve from the dreaded second half of the season by being written out and sent out of Gotham. It's unclear what the plans for her character in the future are. She and Jim were supposed to be expecting a baby, probably originally meant to accommodate the real-life couple of Baccarin and Mackenzie expecting in real life. But then we're told Leslie lost the baby, and by season's end we're left hanging. Oddly enough, Harvey Dent is given next to no screen time this year, regardless of Nicholas D'Agosto getting bumped up to season regular. Well, to wrap this bad boy up, I've got to say it was really no different from last season. I'd hoped they would learn how to pace this season better than last season, but again, they really ran out of gas at the midway point. Now, it seems fashionable to want 13-episode seasons of shows these days. I personally don't advocate it, because I think it's not too much to ask to have a competently made 23-episode season. Except here. They just can't make a compelling 23-episode full season for this show. It inevitably starts out strong only to have them start throwing crap against the wall for the second half and hope that something sticks. And it's not really entirely the showrunner's fault here, since it's not an easy task to make a compelling full season of television out of the concept of a 14-year-old Batman and his 10-year senior proto-villains. It's hard for me to see just who exactly this show is marketed to. Heaven knows it's too gruesome to be a kid's show. It's often too ridiculous to be taken seriously. Do people like it for the whole turn off your brain and have a laugh experience? I just go back to it being a show that's irrelevant in today's landscape. When we have actual bona fide superheroes on TV now like Supergirl, Flash, and Arrow, where is Gotham really supposed to fit in? If we were to rate the show on its two halves, I'd probably give the first half a 3.5 stars out of 5, and the second half a 1.5 stars out of 5. So rounding it off, I'm going to give Gotham Season 2 2.5 stars out of 5, which was exactly my score for Season 1. I think maybe if you traded the Firebug arc for the Mr. Freeze arc, you'd actually have a pretty strong first half of the season there. But I have to wonder if I really want to watch this show again after the last half of this season. I wanted to give this season the benefit of the doubt after last season, where they seemed to have no plan and were writing each week's show by the seat of their pants, since they didn't expect to get picked up for a full season. But if this was the best they could do with a full season to prepare, they really need to seriously consider a 13-episode season, where they can concentrate on delivering a consistently strong season first and foremost. Number 7. Daredevil Season 2. Matt Murdock, the superpowered devil from Hell's Kitchen, is back. This time he has to deal with the war-hardened vigilante known as the Punisher, and an old femme fatale from his past named Elektra, who was tied to a mysterious ninja order known as the Hand. Now, I wasn't really a huge fan of Season 1 of the hugely successful Daredevil series, and to be honest, most of what I didn't like about Season 1 is still present in Season 2. It's just inherent to the show, I suppose. And nothing is going to change that at this point, so going in, I have to accept that their approach for the show doesn't really line up with mine, and it'll probably never be my cup of tea. The season opened real strong with the emergence of the Punisher, aka Frank Castle, who arrives in Hell's Kitchen and begins taking out the mob still operating there in the absence of Wilson Fisk. The first 4 episodes were really strong as Daredevil takes on the Punisher. At first he fails. Frank captures Daredevil and chains him on a rooftop where they debate their ideological differences to fighting crime. Or as Frank aptly describes it, when you put them down they get back up. When I put them down they stay down. It's a very charged episode, and Frank presents Daredevil with the impossible choice by strapping a gun to Matt's hand and giving him the opportunity to either kill the lowlife that Matt and his lawyer guys was defending, or kill Frank himself. The episode ends with some relentless action as Daredevil goes through probably 30 gang members just to reach the bottom of the building's stairwell. Eventually, the Irish mob captures Frank and tortures him. Matt comes to his aid, and Frank tells him the story of his family's murder. Now, as I said, these 4 episodes really work together well, and I'd really love it if they were edited together. You could make a pretty great 3-hour Daredevil movie if you take out some of the unnecessary padding. I really enjoyed seeing the clash of these two titans, where Matt still believes in law and order, while Frank believes in using extreme measures. I always said the Punisher works best as a character when he's set against someone with a moral center greater than his. And Daredevil is a great character to be his counterpart, as they also clashed in the comics many times over the years. John Bernthal does a good job of playing Frank. He comes across more unhinged than the Thomas Jane version, which was played a bit more sympathetic. But despite his argument being compelling to an extent, as I said, Frank really isn't a guy you're supposed to root for. While I don't necessarily think he's a villain, he's a criminal in the strictest sense. That's why it's difficult for me to see him as the lead in his own recently announced series, unless they ultimately tone down his ruthless demeanor to a more manageable level. Needless to say, this depiction of Daredevil is everything Superman vs. Batman's Batman should have been. These early episodes did remind me a bit of The Dark Knight, where Daredevil is getting blamed for the Punisher's creation and the emergence of copycat vigilantes. Much like Nolan's take, they stress the real-world trappings a bit too much for my taste. It's certainly far tonally beyond what Marvel has done outside of Netflix. Matt's law partner, Foggy Nelson, however, does share his secret, and the effects of bearing that secret take its toll on their friendship over the course of the season. And it's sad to witness since they have great chemistry together. Charlie Cox, Eldon Henson, and Deborah Ann Wall are the heart of the show, and they continue to impress at every turn. Matt's priest still has a minor presence in the show, and I'm glad they didn't entirely forget about him. And of course, Matt's Catholicism is given some needed screen time as well. Just as things are starting to happen between Matt and his pretty secretary Karen Page, Matt's old psycho ex-girlfriend Elektra shows back up. Elodie Young is okay, and her Elektra seems a bit more like her comic book counterpart. But I don't think she became a killer back when Matt knew her in college. I could be mistaken, but here in her early days she's quite a thrill-seeker. They don't really even attempt to give Elektra a costume in the early part of the season, much less her comic-accurate costume. She wears a black sleeveless outfit, not unlike Jennifer Garner's version, only with a red turtleneck collar that she pulls up to cover her face. She gets a slightly more authentic costume near the end. While all of this feeds into the theme at hand where Matt is trying to stay on the side of the Angels, it really makes the story veer off into another direction. While the Punisher side of things sees Karen gain Frank's confidence and Foggy's attempts to represent him at trial. I'm not sure I agree with having Frank taking a bullet to the skull being the cause of how he is, but it gives rise to his famous symbol at least. Much like last season, Karen begins a one-woman investigation, this time into Frank Castle's history. She literally steps into her old mentor Ben Urich's shoes. Or I guess I should say more accurately, his office. Unlike last season's subplot for Karen, this one is a bit easier to take. It is interesting how they could take a character like Karen and make her a better investigative reporter than Iris over on The Flash. Now, as I understand that the courtroom is going to play a part in the story, since Matt's a lawyer and having he and Foggy represent Frank at the trial of the Punisher was a no-brainer. But I'm not a fan of procedurals, and I did find myself losing interest in the whole subplot of the crooked DA that keeps trying to stymie Matt and Foggy's case. The Punisher crafts his own trial and is sent to prison where Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin makes a welcome return. He orchestrates a plot worthy of his character to rid himself of an enemy and turn Frank loose in Hell's Kitchen once again. The series does tend to get a bit murky around this point. Stick returns to aid an injured Elektra, and he tells Matt about the Hand, the mysterious ninja clan. Eventually, Daredevil comes face to face with Nobu, the supposed incinerated red ninja who carved him up but good last season. And of course, if you know anything about the comic, you know the Hand somehow managed to cheat death at every turn. I could have done without the weird subplot of the zombie kids that are being bled for some nefarious plan of the Hand, but it gives Rosario Dawson's Claire Temple, aka Night Nurse, an excuse to show up for a few episodes. I did enjoy seeing some of Elektra's backstory with Stick. Stick sends some French assassin to kill her, and that's how she gets her trademark weapons, the dual size. Apparently, the Hand want Elektra to lead them as the Black Sky, an unstoppable killing machine. Meanwhile, Frank hunts down the blacksmith, the man who caused his family's death, which turns out to be his old CO, played by the great Clancy Brown. Kind of a shame Clancy doesn't really get a whole lot to do in the show, but he's always a treat. In the end, Frank spray paints a bulletproof vest with his skull symbol, and now armed to the teeth with the blacksmith's weapons, his transformation into the Punisher is complete. I thought the end was pretty exciting. I never would have called Nobu being the actual villain of the piece, but Daredevil and Elektra face incredible odds with the hope of surviving long enough to live happily ever after. As you might expect, Elektra falls in battle, and that really disappointed me, as I really wanted to see that scene play out with Bullseye, as it did in the Ben Affleck film. It was acted very well here, though. I also didn't like the mask coming off Daredevil in the end fight. I really hate when they do that, but practically all comic book films are guilty of it. I haven't rewatched my review for Season 1, but I think most of my complaints for this season are comparable to the last. I really feel that a lot of the fat could be trimmed from the show in order to improve some of the pacing issues the show has. It still tends to linger on scenes or subplots that are not all that interesting. It comes across much better this season, though, since for the most part, Barenthal's Punisher is a much more compelling monologuer than D'Onofrio's Kingpin. The action is much improved from last season. Daredevil is already suited up at this point, so we can just hit the ground running. However, I would prefer more spectacle. There's plenty of fighting, but not much in the way of Daredevil's acrobatic, swashbuckling nature. He's called Daredevil for a reason. Give us some real death-defying stunts, and for heaven's sake, don't be afraid to use a little CGI. As I've always said, say what you will about Arrow and the CW shows, but they do know how to put together some exciting action set pieces. Speaking of CGI, there's still no real use of Matt's radar sense. Part of the fun of a character's superpower is witnessing him using it, but here, it's still left to the viewer's imagination for the most part. The violence and profanity are still at times off-putting, much like last season. They seriously upped the brutality now that the Punisher and Elektra are involved. I still don't really see why I should be excited about this. I mean, graphic violence and a gritty tone seems to be a fanboy turn-on for some reason, and I'll never understand why. But I could have used a bit less grim and a lot less blood. What to look for should there be a Season 3? Well, we have the Kingpin swearing revenge against Matt, so I'm guessing he'll be a major force in the next season. Elektra will return as expected. Nelson and Murdoch seem to be finished. I really hope they get back together, though. And Karen is now a full-fledged reporter, so I'm guessing that will be explored. Kind of an interesting choice to go with for Karen. Not that I honestly expected them to go with the comic book route of her being a porn star, heroin addict turned Skid Row prostitute that got AIDS, but not really, and sold out Matt's secret before getting killed. And quite frankly, I'm glad they're not going there. It was a ridiculous amount of excess for the comic, and it's even more so in live action. I'm thinking Bullseye will wind up killing Karen, though. That might be why they didn't want him killing Elektra, but I definitely would like to see Bullseye in costume this time. So in the end, I think it was a much better season than last year due to the more compelling story and characters used here. It still has too many of the same problems holding it back as last season, however, for me to really improve my rating, so I'm going to give Daredevil Season 2 3.5 stars out of 5. That's what I gave Season 1, but I probably overrated that season a fair bit. I can't really put this show higher than middle of the road. It needs to be tightened up, so I don't go for that fast forward button anymore. And yeah, I still prefer the Affleck film. Number 6. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 3 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. wastes no time in picking up where the last season left off. The final scene last season left us with a cliffhanger of what became of Gemma Simmons after she was enveloped by the strange monolith. We pick up the action in real time as Fitz has been scouring all corners of the Earth looking for clues to her whereabouts. Meanwhile, Coulson, with his new robotic left hand in play, comes up against a new Black Ops unit called the ATCU, who are trying to find the newly powered Inhumans that have been popping up at an incredible rate. Skye, now known as Daisy, leads the team in trying to find these Inhumans and recruit them before the ATCU finds them first for their own nefarious purposes. You can see how Marvel are trying to maneuver the Inhumans to be their X-Men substitute. Fox, of course, still has the rights to the X-Men. May has left the team and is looking after her elderly father when Hunter recruits her to go after the team's perennial nemesis, Grant Ward. Hunter wants revenge against Ward for torturing and nearly killing Bobby at the end of last season. Bobby is taken to lab work as she rehabs her knee and tries to pick up the slack for the missing Gemma and otherwise occupied Fitz. Ward is taken to reassemble Hydra with himself in command. His first act is to find the late Baron Strucker's son. You might remember Strucker was senselessly slaughtered by Ultron in Age of Ultron. Warner Strucker, in order to get a hold of the Strucker finances. Eventually, Ward strikes an alliance with Gideon Malik, played by Powers Booth, who was once on the World Council. It's true, he was in Avengers. I have to love the TV division's attention to detail, if nothing else. Booth, of course, was Hydra back then, when Hydra was working from within S.H.I.E.L.D. Coulson comes face-to-face with the head of the ATCU, Rosalind Price, played by Constance Zimmer. She makes a fine foil for Coulson, and the two have some palpable chemistry. Their cat-and-mouse game of, can I trust you? Yeah, no, maybe, is all very old-school spy romance. The team eventually locate and rescue Simmons, and it's fair to say one of the highlights of the season was the episode focused on her alone on the desert planet. While there, she meets up with a hunky astronaut named Will, who's been stranded there for 14 years. Will keeps her safe from a fabled Hydra beast that devours any who are ritualistically sent to the planet as a sacrifice. After she returns to Earth, she and Fitz set out to find a way to open another portal to bring him safely back. The Fitz-Simmons pairing gets its share of the spotlight this season, and after 3 full seasons, they finally get together as a couple. Arrow's showrunners should take notes as to how to give a potential relationship between two characters the proper build-up without resorting to cheap emotional contrivances to keep them apart. But I digress. The big heavy of the early part of the season is Lash, Inhuman Exterminator. As it turns out, he also happens to be May's ex, Andrew Garner, who was exposed to the Terrigen Mist. It's a very clever twist, but in typical AOS fashion, Lash makes limited appearances until he eventually turns good and sacrifices his life for our heroes. Which is more or less what happened to Zebo and Reyna last season. In a move that I honestly found shocking, Ward assassinates Rosalind as vengeance for Kara being killed last season. This moves the Ward-Coulson rivalry to another level, causing a darker, more determined change in Coulson. Malik sends Ward to the desert planet after the Hydra creature, known as Hive, because he assimilates the memories of the host bodies he inhabits. Coulson follows and has a showdown with Ward, ultimately killing him with his prosthetic hand. I didn't really care for them taking Phil down such a dark road. What would his hero Cap say? But when Hive takes over Ward's corpse and comes to Earth, Coulson blames himself for acting out of revenge. Lincoln returns after being on the run for much of the season's first half. Eventually he becomes an agent in training. Coulson is initially hesitant that Lincoln has what it takes to follow orders. I enjoyed Lincoln being the team hothead, as it were, though it seems somewhat at odds with his previous depiction last season. Eventually, Bobby and Hunter are written out of the show after a mission in Russia goes wrong. The US disavows them and they choose to leave the team voluntarily. Of course, the original plan was to have them spin off into their own series titled Marvel's Most Wanted, but network brass decided to pass on the pilot, shelving the series. It really shouldn't be too difficult to find a way to have them brought back into the series at some point. They should at least try, since Hunter and Bobby are a great part of the show's cast. Lots of familiar faces return this year, such as President Ellis from Iron Man 3, General Talbot, Dr. Whitehall in a flashback, the Absorbing Man, Peter McNichol as the Asgardian Professor Randolph, and Titus Welliver as Agent Blake from Season 1, who's now on the opposite side of Coulson. But his fate is left as something of a cliffhanger. In the final quarter of the season, Daisy leads the much-awaited Secret Warriors, a team of Inhumans consisting of Joey, who can melt metal, Yo-Yo, who can speed back and forth in the span of a heartbeat, and Lincoln. Hive turns on Malik, killing his daughter. In revenge, Malik gives up intel on Hydra, leading to their final defeat at the hands of Talbot's forces. Which feels kinda underwhelming given the overall reach Hydra has had over the MCU at large. But in fairness, Hydra had been severely crippled at this point, and this was more the sloppy leftovers of Hydra than the main course. Hive has the power to sway Inhumans to his side, and that becomes his main threat to the team. He gathers Inhumans to his cause, including an Aussie named James, who has the powers of the X-Men's Gambit. He's a fun character who thankfully lives to return next season. Hive eventually sways Daisy to his side and sets her against the team. She kills Malik and threatens to kill Fitz and Mac. The team turns to Dr. Ratcliffe for a cure. He too is an amusing character that I'm glad to say survives the season. Unfortunately, Hive captures him, forcing him to create a Magneto-like plan to turn all humans into Inhumans by draining Daisy's blood, and he succeeds in making several Inhuman primitives. Daisy is cured and saved by Lash before his death at the hands of the Swede James, but this leaves Daisy with intense withdrawal such that she returns to Hive asking to be taken back. When Hive can't accommodate her, a battle ensues. I've always considered Chloe to be one of the stronger actresses on TV these days, and she really does a great job with the role here. We finally get to see Hive's actual kisser in a hugely satisfying if all too brief confrontation scene between he and Coulson. Much like Arrow had the grave as the ongoing mystery this season, AOS has a vision given to Daisy by another Inhuman of someone dying aboard a spaceship, the clue being it's someone carrying a gold cross necklace. And I thought it was a very successful construct, as you see the cross being unknowingly passed from member to member. Lincoln is the unfortunate one, however, as he knowingly takes the cross from Daisy and boards the ship carrying Hive and his pestilence into space. Captain Rogers would be proud. I thought it was a pretty cool ending to have Hive no longer scheming but accepting his fate beside the injured Lincoln. I liked Ward, but it was getting pretty tough to keep him in the show as an ongoing villain. The last few minutes of the season flashes us forward 6 months where Daisy is apparently a vigilante of sorts now known as Quake. And she's on the run from Coulson and Mac. At this point, Coulson is no longer director of S.H.I.E.L.D., begging the question, who is? Well, May seems the obvious answer, but I prefer her in the field. And currently, without Bobby, Daisy, and Hunter, Mac's the only real combatant on the team, so I don't think it's May. It's probably not Fury again, since they can't really afford Samuel L. Jackson on a weekly basis. I'm guessing, or more accurately hoping, it's Maria Hill. She would make the most sense, and she was noticeably absent from Civil War. The season ender was largely satisfying, and I think I said last season, AOS's biggest problem seems to be it's boiling the pot a bit too long before the home run stretch kicks the show into overdrive. In fairness, though, on the rewatch, the season wasn't quite as bland as I thought the first time around. The problem may be with the increasing amount of superhero fare available on a weekly basis, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. comes across as the sad sister. It's not as flashy when compared to the bona fide comic character shows such as Flash and Supergirl. No one really talks about, hey, did you see AOS this week? And it's a shame it tends to get choked out like that because binge-watching the show really is the best way to appreciate it. I'm giving Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 3 4 stars out of 5. At the beginning of the season, we meet Oliver and Felicity where we left them, in domestic bliss, far from the madness that is the newly christened Star City, renamed in Ray Palmer's memory. But a new player is in town causing trouble for the Arrowless Team Arrow, one Damien Dark and his evil organization known as Hive. And soon, Thea and Laurel come calling for Ollie to return. Felicity is strangely supportive in their returning to the team. Turns out she's been helping from afar, and before long the whole team is reunited. With his Arrow persona killed last season by Roy taking the fall for him, Ollie embraces a more positive role as the city's protector, publicly dubbing himself the Green Arrow. It took them 3 seasons to get there, but it's still largely satisfying to have a slightly more light-hearted take on the character. One of the high points of the season was Damien Dark himself, played by Neil McDonough, with equal parts jocular wit and grim intimidation. As we're told last season, Dark was a contemporary of Ra's al Ghul, and owns his share of Lazarus Pit water that's prolonged his life. They never really play up his use of Lazarus Pit waters, but his practice of magic. Dark gets his hooks on Quentin Lance early, and gets his help on several underhanded capers by threatening him with Laurel. Eventually, Green Arrow finds out, but it's decided that Lance will continue on as a mole in Hive. Thea gets a pretty good arc this season. As the season opens, she's enjoying her new role as Speedy, but soon the bloodlust from her dip in the Lazarus Pit begins to take over. Jerry Ryan guest stars as an old friend of Moira's who intends to run for mayor until her daughter is abducted by Anarchy, who has been hired by Dark. Ironically, this isn't the first time Ryan has been in a DC show. She was in the original Flash series as a kidnapped debutante that was traumatized by the deadly evil Nightshade. Anarchy becomes a recurring foil for Thea, who sets him on fire during one of her bloodlust attacks. He takes to calling her Mommy, which is as equally hilarious as it is disturbing. While the writing this season doesn't reach the level of absurdity of last season, there's still strange inconsistencies, such as Dark threatening Lance with his daughter Laurel's safety, while chastising Anarchy's kidnapping Ryan's daughter as distasteful. How's that? About this time, Laurel discovers how Ollie revived Thea, setting up her returning her sister Sarah's corpse to Nanda Parbat, in the hope that Malcolm, the newly reigning Raz, will restore her in the pit. He eventually acquiesces, but immediately after Sarah's regeneration, Nyssa, who's been relegated to Malcolm's sparring partner, destroys the pit, effectively ending the show's get-out-of-death-free card. More on that later. After being brought back to Star City, Sarah gets free and tries to kill Thea. After capturing her, in comes John Constantine as our guest star to take Ollie and Laurel on a magical mystery tour to the spirit world to recover Sarah's soul. In the flashback, we find Ollie met John before and he owes him a favor. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a whole lot to do in the episode. For the record, I watched the series Constantine on the strength of Matt Ryan's performance, since horror, demons, and that stuff really isn't my cup of tea. But he gives a great performance here once again, and I wouldn't be against utilizing his talents on any of the CW shows in the future. Can I just say how great it is to get Katie Lotz back as Sarah Lance? She does a great job here, as does all the cast, but I thought the entire cast really elevated their game this season. Not long after, Sarah hits the road, unable to control her bloodlust. Enter Ray Palmer, who survived his apparent death by his long-awaited shrinking powers. He also sticks around for a couple of episodes before deciding to remain dead to the public. Of course, Legends of Tomorrow ensures that the two heroes won't be unemployed for long. Diggle finally gets a costume of sorts, and a mask, or at least the half-hearted attempt at a mask, and the moniker Spartan. After 2 long seasons, the Diggle's brother mystery is finally addressed. It gives David Ramsey a nice chance for some of the spotlight, and he does a great job with the part, but it comes across very convoluted. It's unclear at first if Andy is under Hive's sway, since their troops, known as Ghosts, all take a little mother's helper that's supposed to ensure their allegiance. But apparently, Andy is a true believer, and was a dirty louse from the get-go. It seems strange that the bottom line is that Diggle never really knew his brother at all, and that his saintly reverence for him was undeserved. Even though Andy's wife and son are mentioned a few times, they really don't have any part of the story. It's so sloppily handled, as if the 2 full seasons they had to plan for the story meant nothing, and they made it up as they went along. Then we have the mid-season crossover episode between Arrow and The Flash. I'm going to cover it here since Arrow's storyline was more prevalent to either show. Unlike last year, this is actually a 2-part story, so if you're not watching both shows, you're not going to get the full picture. It works as a great setup to Legends of Tomorrow in some subtle and not-so-subtle ways. Vandal Savage is introduced, as well as Hawkman. Kendra, who is at this point in the Flash series Cisco's girlfriend, emerges as Hawkgirl. It's always cool to see both Flash and Green Arrow work together, and they integrate both teams pretty effortlessly. Unfortunately, they choose this episode as the backdrop to pick up the Ollie baby mama drama storyline planted nearly 2 seasons ago. Not only is it pretty much a downer for a superhero team-up episode, but it signals the Elicity monster rearing its ugly head for the second half of the season. But apart from the subplot, it's really an enjoyable feature-length story. When Felicity finds out Ollie has a son that his baby mama made him promise not to tell her, it puts their relationship on the rocks, which single-handedly results in nearly the entire cast of both shows getting killed. How's that for a metaphor? Fortunately, Flash manages to race back in time, giving them a do-over. Vandal is destroyed, the Hawks depart, and all is well for the time being. Malcolm gathers some of Vandal's remains, opening the door for his return on Legends of Tomorrow. Ollie's main arc this season is that he can't be the killer he once was. He needs to give hope both as the Green Arrow and as Mayor Queen. That's put to the test during the mid-season finale when Dark has he and Felicity ambushed by gunmen. Felicity is injured in the attack and becomes paralyzed from the waist down. I actually really liked the way this was handled. Ollie becomes more relentless in his approach to finding Dark, leading to Quentin Lance questioning if he's reverting back to being a killer. Green Arrow goes so far as to release the recently captured Anarchy, with the hope that he'll be able to lead him to Dark. The implication being that while he himself won't kill Dark, he'll have no compunction about letting a maniac like Anarchy kill Dark. I loved that concept. It's a cool bit of wiggle room that the Batman Begins Bruce Wayne would have appreciated. In the end, Anarchy attempts to kill Dark's family, and so Arrow and Speedy must step in and stop him. So much for the best-laid plans. Echo Kellum plays Curtis Holt this season, which is a character they intend to turn into their version of DC's Mr. Terrific. The only problem is Curtis seems to have more in common with Steve Urkel than the comic book version of Mr. Terrific. They made the character gay as an obvious attempt at appealing to that demographic. Now anyone knows me knows I hate race, gender-changing characters and the like. If they want to have a gay hero on the show, create a new hero. Don't take the lazy way out and just take the name of another hero and assign a different personality to it. Do like you did with Diggle. Make him his own character. They didn't steal a personality for him. They created a new one. And they could have done the same thing here. Have Curtis be the brother of the real Mr. Terrific or something, and spin him into his own identity. Curtis seems to be here as a Felicity substitute. While she spends half the time mired in drama, Curtis picks up the slack in humor. His tech wizardry helps alleviate a little bit of the drama when he creates a chip that allows Felicity to walk again. I'll take this opportunity to jump into the flashback portion of the show. The season opens with the ridiculous concept of Ollie being the proto-Arrow in Coast City, and doing pretty badly at it. He's too ashamed to return home after the killer he's become. Amanda Waller finds him, drugs him, in typical Amanda Waller fashion, and sends him back to the island on a mission. Now I like that they've returned to the island, and since it's been a full season since we've been there, it feels relatively fresh. The plot is nothing much to speak of, but in a way, I think that's what makes it successful. It's pretty straightforward, without a crapload of twists and turns to follow. It's nothing too special, but it doesn't overstay its welcome like many previous flashback seasons have. In a nutshell, the flashback heavy is named Ryder. He has prisoners working a poppy field as a front for him to find the mysterious idol that Dark has in present day, which is somewhere hidden on the island. Ollie goes to work for Ryder, ultimately allying himself with Tiana, a Russian prisoner. Eventually Ryder finds the idol, Tiana gets hold of it, and its dark magic corrupts her. This all plays fairly well except for the rushed ending, where Tiana asks Ollie to kill her. It's like, nah, kill me, it's the only way. And Ollie's like, if I have to. It could have been played a little bit better is what I'm saying. She makes Ollie promise to go to Russia to tell her family of her fate, which is where we can expect to find him next season. A lot of people want to just nix the flashbacks entirely at this point, but Ollie joining the Russian mob has been hinted at since the first season, so I'm kinda curious to see it. A few familiar faces show up this season, such as Colton Haynes returning for an episode as Roy Harper, formerly Arsenal. I really wish he'd return full-time, but I believe he wanted out due to his anxiety issues. Selena Jade returns during a flashback as a hallucination. Katana gets only a brief cameo, as her role in Suicide Squad put the kibosh on any further appearances. In the same way, Amanda Waller is unceremoniously killed off with a bullet in the head. She died as she lived, with a smug grin on her face. Megalyn E.K. makes her first live-action appearance as Vixen. Oliver makes a cheeky reference to meeting her during her animated adventures. She does a great job, and it's disappointing that she's one of the few heroes introduced not to be spun off to Legends of Tomorrow. They give Felicity a lot of the focus, arguably too much this season, but the problem isn't so much getting the screen time, but what they do with it. I think that Emily Bett Rickards did well with the paralyzed Felicity storyline, going as far as to play against a hallucination of her former goth self. If they had just stuck with this as her storyline for the season, all would be well, but more on that later. Now, I didn't hate last season, but this season, to its credit, does try to fix the many problems left by the previous season. Dig and Ollie kiss and make up, metaphorically speaking, from Ollie's endangering Lila last season. Detective Lance goes back to being on Team Arrow full-time. Most importantly, Sarah is brought back by the Lazarus Pit, and Malcolm is removed as the head of the League of Assassins, along with his hand being removed from his arm by Ollie. This was actually my favorite arc of the season. Thea's not giving in to her bloodlust takes its toll on her, causing her wounds to reappear. Meanwhile, Nyssa has escaped her confinement and holds the only potion that will save Thea's life as a bargaining chip to hold over Malcolm unless he relinquishes his role as the League of Assassins leader. I love how Nyssa still considers Ollie to be her husband and refers to him as such, even despite there being no attraction between them. In the end, Ollie saves Thea, and Nyssa gets control of the League, which he quickly disbands. It also appears Thea and Malcolm are finally on the outs full-time. This is the first time pretty much since the first season to make use of Malcolm as a villain again, and Barrowman really gets the fire that he had in that first season finale. Last season, and even a few episodes prior in this season, Malcolm has been used as a less than savory ally, but his real forte is in being a villain. Unfortunately, the powers that be seem content to marginalize him, making him a stooge for Damien Dark in the last half of the season. Now that Barrowman has an all-encompassing contract for all 4 shows, maybe his role as a heavy will finally be given a chance to flourish elsewhere. At the same time, Felicity gets yet another storyline as her long-lost dad, dubbed the Calculator, as he has the same hacking skills that she has, appears. Eventually, Felicity has him arrested, but it seems pretty hypocritical. Ollie has gone out of his way not to kill Malcolm because he's Thea's father, despite the huge body count he racked up from the undertaking, while Felicity turns her dad in for his decidedly unlethal crimes out of some petty spite. Felicity's mom, Donna, returns several times. I don't really mind her in small doses, but the reunion between her and Felicity's dad was insufferable. But to be honest, I thought it was amusing to see her paired up with Quentin. But less is definitely more with her character. The last quarter of the season was the most trying. They laid the Olicity on very thick. Ollie and Felicity break up when she finds out that Ollie was keeping his son William a secret from her, regardless of the fact that Ollie was forced to keep him a secret due to William's mother giving Ollie that ultimatum. Much as I disliked the baby mama subplot, the resolution kinda worked for me. It seemed a cautionary tale. This guy cheated on every relationship he ever had with whomever he could. It seems his penance is not to have a relationship with his son during his childhood. At this point, Dark goes to jail for kidnapping William, which feels like a pretty useless time waster, giving Guggenheim a chance to write more court drama. After he breaks out, Dark's full plan titled Genesis is finally revealed. And yes, as a big Genesis fan, I was happy Felicity made the obvious reference. His plan, to wit, nuke the planet, killing billions of people, which will feed his little idol, giving him unlimited power, while he and his followers take refuge in an underground bunker made to look like Pleasantville. Dark expounds on his plan to reset the world, but as much as I applaud them for trying something new this season with mysticism, it inevitably feels more like a James Bond plot than something a team of masked superheroes should be dealing with. After Andy is exposed as a traitor, Dark learns of the team's secret identities. And while I could buy the previous villains, Malcolm, Slade, and Roz, having some kind of code or agenda which would cause them to keep Team Arrow's secret identities, I don't really see Dark as that type. He comes across far too ruthless, and it's not really explained why he wouldn't out Oliver. This is a good time to point out that the action on this show is superb. It's still second to none of the other comic shows out there. The fight scenes and vehicle chases never fail to impress. Now, the grave has been teased since day one. This season, somebody on the team was gonna die. Unlike Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they didn't go with a fringe character, but with Laurel. And this was most troubling because Black Canary has a long history with Green Arrow in the comics. And many of us hoped that when the smoke cleared from the Olicity mania, maybe they'd work Ollie closer to Laurel again. In fact, in the few shows leading up to her death, they did try to move her a bit closer into Ollie's sphere. Laurel was actually hated by fans about as much as Felicity is now, back when they dismantled her character in Season 2. But they really made strides in winning folks back, making Laurel an actually good character again. But ultimately, Guggenheim pretty much will do anything to satisfy the rabid Olicity crowd, going so far as to kill off Ollie's comic-accurate love interest as to prevent Felicity having a rival. It's really almost frightening the extent to which they seem to have made the entire cast of characters genuflect to Felicity in deference to the Olicity fans. Now, I'm not going to waste time ranting over Laurel's death. At this point, we all know Katie Cassidy is under contract for at least 3 of the 4 DCCW shows. Not sure about Supergirl at this point. Her death seemed suspect to begin with. First the doctor saying she was alright, then Laurel telling Ollie to make some secret promise, then she suddenly dies. What will most likely happen is her return will be born out of some time travel shenanigans on Legends of Tomorrow, bringing her back to Arrow for a few episodes, and then we'll still have Katie playing Black Siren on Flash a couple of times a year. In any case, you have to feel bad for Quentin. The guy loses a daughter every year like clockwork. Not a whole lot of new villains of the week this season. The most promising one was Double Down, a metahuman that creates razor-sharp cards from his tattoos. Cupid returns, as does Bug-Eye Bandit with an impressive henchman made entirely of robot bees. Murmur returns and joins Dark's team. His creepy, ghoulish look makes him an effective henchman. As does the ever-entertaining Vinnie Jones as Brick. In the end, Diggle ends up killing his brother. They seem to want to play it up as a spur-of-the-moment thing at first, before settling in on Diggle straight-up killing him. Not long after, we have the big showdown between Dark and Green Arrow, and it's staged as a very enjoyable brawl in the middle of town. In order for Green Arrow to win, he needs more positive vibes to counteract the power of the tens of thousands of souls Dark killed with his nuke. He does this as Oliver Queen, making a speech to Star City, rousing them to defend their city. The plan works, Ghostbusters 2 style, and Dark is weakened enough for Arrow to kill him. Now, this feels counterproductive. After all the platitudes of Ollie needing a different approach and how he can't be the killer he once was, it seems the showrunners completely backtracked for the sake of giving the ending a bit more edge. When Dark reminds Ollie he didn't even kill the man who murdered his mother, it feels like they're saying in effect, well, we didn't kill Slade because he was definitely cooler, and we wish we could bring him back. You, not so much. It's pretty confusing to what extent Team Arrow uses lethal force. For all Ollie's talk about not dropping bodies anymore, for the most part he's still shooting people with plain old-fashioned arrows. Now all of Damien's ghosts wear heavy-looking flak vests, and Ollie tends to shoot them in the shoulder. Andy takes such an arrow in the same spot while wearing the uniform and he survived. So there's plausible deniability in Ollie's case. What troubles me more is Diggle. He starts out using a tranq gun, which indiscriminately goes back and forth between using tranq darts and live ammo. Why is Ollie okay with this? Why doesn't Quentin get on Diggle's case about this? It's kind of mind-boggling. And am I the only one who remembered that Thea was immune to Dark's life-draining whammy? Why didn't she get the kill? Would have made her leaving at the end a bit more effective at least. Speaking of leaving, they did the same thing last year with the team splitting up. Quentin is leaving town with Donna, Thea contemplating her life, John rejoining the military. Can't they just end the season on a group hug and a glass of champagne for a change? And this was supposed to be the lighthearted season. So in the final analysis, was this season better than the last? Well, yes and no. Last season's biggest strength was also its biggest weakness. It tried to be too ambitious, taking a crap ton of ideas and plot lines, throwing them to the wall, and seeing what would stick. This season seemed better written and tighter of focus, at least. Part of the problem is that the last half of the season continued to fall back on Felicity-themed storylines instead of exploring other mystical characters from the DC catalog. It was a perfect opportunity to pull together a Justice League Dark type of team-up at the end, with Constantine returning, introduce Zatanna, Dr. Fate. The possibilities are staggering. Instead, we got the Smoke Family reunion. I'm giving Arrow Season 4 4 stars out of 5. Number 4. Legends of Tomorrow. Well, we've entered the top 5 shows of the season with Legends of Tomorrow, and in all honesty, I almost put this show at the bottom of the list at the mid-season. They got off to a very rocky start, but I think they really turned it around with a very strong second half. Before I get to the pluses and negatives, a quick recap of the plot. Rip Hunter goes against the wishes of the Time Masters, a group whose sole function is to see that time unfolds as it should, to track down and destroy one Vandal Savage, an immortal tyrant who has lived for millennia and has conquered the world in Rip's era 2166, killing Rip's wife and child in the process. To help him accomplish this, Rip rounds up a crew of heroes and villains from 2016 to complement his time travel ship, the Wave Rider, and travel to time periods where they might catch Savage unawares. The Wave Rider has an AI called Gideon, which may or may not be the same future tech created by Barry Allen. The crew consists of Ray Palmer, the Atom, the shrinking hero who was presumed dead after Season 3 of Arrow. Firestorm, now comprised of Dr. Martin Stein and his new partner Jefferson Jackson. Sarah Lance, who was dubbed the White Canary by her sister Laurel in the pilot. Hawkman and Hawkgirl, who dealt with Savage in the Big Flash Arrow crossover. And the two rogues, Captain Cold and Heatwave. Rip promises if they work together, they will become legends. But eventually admits that the reason he picked them is that they are essentially the B-team, and their deaths would have minimal impact on the unfolding of history. The team is pursued by Kronos, a bounty hunter working for the Time Masters, hired to bring them in. After a strong initial opening, the series gets a bit bumpy by killing off Hawkman, who is no small character in DC lore, fairly early on. This leaves Hawkgirl to mope about his loss and engage in an ill-conceived triangle between her, Ray, and Hawkman's memory. The biggest problem seems to be for the Legends in the making that they come off more like the gang who couldn't shoot straight, causing more problems in the timeline than they solve. For a Time Master, Rip seems to have pretty poor foresight. Obviously, part of a team concept is watching their growing pains, as it were, and seeing them learn to trust and work with each other. Savage, when last seen, was incinerated, and they don't really give an explanation as to how he returned beyond Malcolm saving some of his remains at the end of the crossover. Eventually it's revealed that only Hawkgirl can kill Savage, and only by using a weapon forged by certain elements from her past, which makes it a very narrow hoop for them to jump through, as they frustratingly try to kill Savage again and again over the span of history. One of the more glaring issues the series has, particularly early on, is that it comes off more like a time-traveling Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where the group is more prone to working undercover to pull off some kind of covert mission than to suit up in their costumes and cut loose with their powers on the bad guys. Oftentimes, obvious contrivances are made to take Stein or Jax off the table as to spare the CGI budget for an episode. Ditto Ray's Atom suit. One would think a shrinking man would be of invaluable help, but they tend to marginalize Atom, having whole episodes without having him shrink or even appear in costume. This is one point that really needs to be addressed going forward. The main highlight of the early season is an episode that takes place in Star City 2046, in which the son of Deathstroke, Grant Wilson, takes over, having killed all who have opposed him. The new Green Arrow is Connor Hawke, who in this possible future is the son of John Diggle. These types of stories are always fun, and it gives Sarah a chance for the spotlight. Stephen Amell makes a fantastic appearance as an old, one-armed Oliver Queen, who eventually gets pressed back into service to fight the new Deathstroke. Amell's performance is exceptional, and his age makeup is pretty convincing. His beard kind of recalls the classic goateed look of Green Arrow. The downside is a not too well fleshed out Grant Wilson, since in typical CW fashion, they spend the B-plot on a Jax, Ray, and Kendra triangle, rather than beef up the villain's part. Mick Rory, aka Heatwave, really steals the show here. He's hilarious. He and Cold make the perfect team. But where Cold eventually comes around to the concept of serving the greater good, Mick doesn't have the slightest altruistic bone in his body. It's genuinely heartbreaking to see them growing apart over the course of the season, culminating in Mick betraying the team to space pirates, only to have Cold have to take him out, Old Yeller style. After a very heavy-handed excursion into 1958, the series finally hits its stride. Kronos captures the Wave Rider, stranding Ray, Kendra, and Sarah in 1958. When the crew returns to retrieve them 2 years into the future, Sarah has returned to the League of Assassins under the influence of Ra's al Ghul. When we last saw Sarah on Arrow, she left town fighting the urges of her bloodlust to kill in battle. That recurs early on in the season, but in a throwaway line, Ra's says that meditation and herbs have cured Sarah of her bloodlust. They could have just named the same lotus potion that cured Thea over in Arrow, but chose to be more vague here. While the team tries to reach Sarah, Kronos captures Snart and reveals himself to be Mick, whom Snart did not kill. Mick was found by the Time Masters and programmed to hunt the crew of the Wave Rider. In the exciting conclusion, Kendra battles Sarah, forcing her to regain her memory, and the team takes on Kronos in Ra's domain. They capture him and pledge to reform him. Next up, the team take a trip to the future, for an exploration of that age-old quandary. Would you kill Hitler as a child, knowing full well what he'd become, yet while he was still innocent of any crime? The target in question is Perdegaton, a 12-year-old or so, who is being tutored by Savage to one day conquer the world, only to be assassinated by Savage in the end. It's handled pretty thoughtfully, as Rip is torn between potentially saving his family by murdering the child. He concludes, however, that his inability to do it is a sign not of weakness, but of goodness. The team then find themselves in the Wild West being chased by the Time Master's mercenaries. They run into one of Rip's old acquaintances, DC's perennial Old West favorite, Jonah Hex. It's a fun little tale that sees Ray play sheriff, while Kendra meets an older version of herself in a past life, and Dr. Stein saves the life of a young H.G. Wells. Another interesting concept has another of the Time Master's operatives, the Pilgrim, going back in time to kill the team's younger selves. The crew manages to head her off, snatching up young and in most cases infant versions of themselves, and hiding them with Rip's adopted mum, who is also keeping his perpetually young self under her watchful eye. It's a fun episode that has its poignant moments as Jax wrestles with whether he should risk creating a potential time paradox by warning his dad of his impending death in the military. The Pilgrim also gets an enjoyable comeuppance. At this point, I should point out the series' rules for time travel. It seems admittedly complicated at first blush, but it pretty much boils down to you can't do a time travel do-over in this universe, a la Back to the Future 2. You get one bite at the apple, and if you fail, you can't try again for fear of the dreaded time paradox. For example, Rip goes back in time to Egypt at one point to kill Savage before he gets his immortal power. But he hesitates in killing him, missing his only opportunity to do so in that time. He can't just go back and try again. The nature of time travel is complex to begin with, but they do the best they can with the concept here. As the season nears its end, the team decides to head Vandal off in the future, in 2166, mere days before he is to kill Rip's family. Savage rules the globe with his daughter at his side. Eventually, Snart brings her around to their side, and they gain the invaluable weapon of a bracelet that Kendra melts down to coat her mace, allowing her to kill Savage. The CGI, it should be noted, is exceptionally good given the limitations of television. The best example is during the battle between Savage's giant robot, the Leviathan, and the Atom, who now has the power to grow as well as shrink. In a pretty decent twist, Kendra fails to kill Savage after she finds that Savage has the 2116 reincarnation of Carter as his brainwashed lackey. Rip brings both Carter and Savage prisoner on the Wave Rider. Rip intends to deliver Savage to the Time Masters with proof that Savage has tampered with the timeline. Evidently, being immortal isn't a crime, but affecting the timeline through time jumps is. But it's revealed that the Time Masters were actually in league with Savage all along. They're backing his takeover of the world, as they see it as humanity's only chance for survival against an imminent attack by Thanagar. To make matters worse, they had Rip's family killed in order to use Rip to orchestrate the timeline to their satisfaction. So when the entire first half of the season paints Rip and the crew as highly ineffective, it turns out it was all by design by the Time Masters. I thought this was handled quite cleverly overall, and it pretty much won me over for this season. As Savage escapes with Kendra and the brainwashed Carter, the team attacks the Time Masters' base, destroying the Oculus, the device that allows them to see the future. Captain Cold knocks out Heatwave and gives his life to blow up the Oculus. I'm not sure how Sarah was expected to carry Mick back to the Wave Rider. He's a pretty big boy. Sarah and Snart are given the hint of a possible relationship here. I actually liked Rip and Sarah's chemistry better, but obviously with Rip's mission being to save his wife and son, it was hardly the time for such a romance. I frankly always hated that they tried to make Sarah a full-out lesbian. She was originally going to be a thing with Oliver, but post that breakup, they really haven't played up that she likes guys too, beyond the brief flirtation with Snart. It's nice that CW didn't spare the expense to get several of their series co-stars to make an appearance in the season, including Green Arrow, Damien Dark, Ra's al Ghul, Nyssa, Cisco, Quentin, and Laurel. Ultimately, Rip fails to save his family from being murdered by Savage despite his innumerable tries. As we are told repeatedly, sometimes time wants to happen. In the same way, when Sarah eventually learns that Dark killed Laurel and asks to be taken back to prevent it, Rip tells her that if she were present, both she, Laurel, and Quentin would die. It's kind of a shaky excuse that boils down to, we can't save everyone because reasons. I think the show had the best finale of all the CW shows this season. The crew needs to travel to 3 separate time periods to where Vandal attempts to mix Carter's blood with a meteor. The results would allow Savage to have dominion over Earth for all time. While in close proximity to the meteor, Savage loses his immortal power and can be killed. The team splits up and of course ends up succeeding in killing him in all 3 time zones. It's certainly a much more thrilling finish when you consider all we were promised is that they'd have to hold Savage down so that Hawkgirl could stab him with his super special knife. Carter regains his memory and the two go off in search of their own adventures. I think they were the weakest link in the show. I definitely would like to see them again, but they work better as recurring characters than getting the focus for a whole nother season. Rip reunites the rest of the crew to take the place of the now defunct Time Masters, and the season cliffhanger introduces the team to Our Man, who warns them not to board the Wave Rider per future Mix orders. They don't address Laurel or Snart's return, so their fates are pretty much left subject to if the show writers can conceive a logical return for them. So yeah, in the end I think the series really pulled it together. They laid a solid groundwork this season, they have a really good cast with a fun premise, and I'm certainly looking forward to the future. I'm giving Legends of Tomorrow Season 1 4 stars out of 5. Number 3. Agent Carter Season 2. We pick up this season with Peggy tying up a loose end from last season, the capture of Dottie Underwood, played once again by, Be Still My Heart, Bridget Regan. Before Peggy can interrogate Dottie on her apparent theft of a lapel pin, the SSR's new chief Jack Thompson sends her out to LA to assist Daniel Sousa, who is now chief of the West Coast wing of the SSR, in the investigation of a woman frozen to death in a lake. Daniel and Peggy had that unspoken affection vibe going on last year, but now Sousa is set to propose to his pretty nurse girlfriend, Violet. Peggy is also reunited with Mr. Jarvis and meets Mrs. Jarvis as she settles into one of Howard Stark's mansions for her stay. Mr. Jarvis, of course, is eager to get back in the thick of things for another adventure. While investigating the odd murder, Peggy meets Dr. Wilkes, and the two take a shine to one another. One of my biggest gripes with last season was that the misogyny on display was pretty heavy-handed. This season doesn't revel in the discrimination of the period. Peggy is finally considered an ace agent in her own right, without having to take the office lunch order. In the same way, a few brief scenes early in the show reveal some of the unfortunate racism of the period without beating us over the head with it, as to make the show an unpleasant experience. The villain of the piece is Whitney Frost, a beautiful actress and wife of an aspiring senator that has connections to a powerful council called the Arena Club. She's really the brains behind the two of them and has the grand ambition to harness an energy known as zero matter. Now, if this season has any flaw, it's that zero matter isn't really the most compelling MacGuffin. While trying to steal a sample of the zero matter, an accident causes both she and Dr. Wilkes to be affected in different ways. Haley Atwell has claimed that Peggy Carter had the first interracial kiss in comics, so in that tradition it's fitting that she have something of a romance with Wilkes. It doesn't go much further than a kiss, however, before Wilkes is turned into a living ghost. Dominic Cooper makes a welcome return as Howard Stark, now a film director in his spare time. He puts his considerable intellect to work at figuring out how to cure Dr. Wilkes. Meanwhile, Whitney is given the strange powers of absorbing people into herself. It leaves her with a growing black scar. Whitney, of course, is based on the Iron Man villain Madame Mask, and I was a little disappointed that they used the character here instead of a potential Iron Man film. She's Madame Mask in name only, though. She isn't even called Madame Mask during the series. I was happy to see some of Peggy's backstory coming to light. She was engaged to be married, only to give up that life to follow her brother's urging to become an agent after he's killed in battle. We get to see Whitney's backstory as a parallel, but it's a bit more cliché, where she grew up with a trampish mother who encouraged her to use her looks instead of her brain, despite her genius-level intellect. Meanwhile, Jack Thompson gets sweet-talked by his former mentor and War Department official Vernon Masters, played by Kurtwood Smith, who is working with the Council. Hayley Atwell has some great action scenes throughout, as well as some humorous ones, such as one involving the returning Ray Wise as the head of Roxxon. Mr. Jarvis also gets a funny bit of foreshadowing as his voice adorns the Stark Mansion burglar alarm, causing him to remark of his distaste of spending eternity as a disembodied voice. Agent Rose returns from last season. She and scientist Samberly make for some amusing comrades in arms. During her first encounter with Frost, Peggy gets sent over a rail which causes her to be impaled. Sousa's nurse girlfriend Violet patches her up, but sensing the love vibes between the two, she breaks things off with Sousa. While Peggy is on the mend, she breaks Dottie out of prison, pairing her with Mr. Jarvis to humorous effect, as she attempts to steal a sample of Frost's blood. She ends up getting captured by Masters and delivered to Frost. Whitney's shady spouse becomes a battered husband in effect, eventually turning on her, but Frost ends up killing him and half the council, establishing herself as the new leader. She also seeks aid from a crime boss named Manfredi. After a rather stereotypical introduction, he turns out to be a pretty amusing character. Peggy and Mr. Jarvis set out to rescue Dottie, who eventually escapes once again free and clear, like last season. But in the meantime, Whitney kidnaps Dr. Wilkes to try and take his portion of Zero Matter for herself, and shoots Anna in the process. She survives, but at the cost of never being able to have children. Which to me is a little odd, since Peggy was the one impaled with a steel pipe through her abdomen, yet she's back in business after 48 hours, none the worse for wear. Anna's injuries seem much more severe in comparison. Props to James D'Arcy as he gets some good dramatic moments here. Mr. Jarvis is out for revenge and attempts to kill Frost. Only problem is, she can't be killed. He and Peggy are captured and knocked unconscious, which leads to a goofy but thoroughly enjoyable dream sequence based on a 1940s musical number. This is the only cameo for Angie, who was a regular last season. It's disappointing they couldn't get her a bigger role this season, but it was good to see her again, however briefly. Peggy and Mr. Jarvis escape the van and have a good heart-to-heart talk in the desert. In the meantime, Jack and Sousa join forces with Vernon to attempt to destroy Frost. The plan doesn't go quite according to plan when Jack double-crosses Vernon, leaving him at Frost's mercy. Peggy tries to rescue Wilkes, but he declines her help and confronts Frost, basically exploding in front of her. She absorbs all the Zero Matter that he possessed and has become even more powerful. The team planned to trap her by zapping her with the returning Howard Stark's Gamma Cannon, which would release the Zero Matter back into the rift from whence it came. The plan works with a little last-minute heroics from Sousa. In the end, all is well with the Jarvises, as well as Dr. Wilkes, who accepts a job with Howard Stark. As for Whitney, she ends up in a padded cell. Before she could head back to New York, sparks finally fly for Peggy and Sousa. It would be interesting to find out if they ended up together. In The Winter Soldier, Peggy says Cap saved her husband's life, and it's curious to see if they would work that fact in retroactively. The season ends on the cliffhanger of Chief Thompson being shot and apparently killed by a mystery man to steal a file he had. Sadly, poor ratings doomed the show, and not halfway through the short season, ABC began to burn the show off 2 episodes a week, a sure sign of cancellation. Sure enough, the axe fell, leaving these questions all unanswered. Well, while not overly pleased with the first season, I for one really enjoyed this season. It had a bit of a lighter and humorous tone without wallowing too greatly in the unfortunate prejudices of the day. I was glad to see Dottie Underwood returning, and it looked like she would have been a frequent adversary, if not frenemy, of Peggy going forward. I was also very happy with Wynne Everett's performance. She made for a strong yet sympathetic villain. She had just the right haunted look to make her performance all the more captivating. I'd like to have seen her return at some point had the show continued. I really love the period setting. It's just a fun era to have a spy series set in. All the period music was also very enjoyable. I liked the sci-fi direction the show took on this season, but it's also a negative. As I said before, the Zero Matter storyline really isn't that compelling. We find out next to nothing about the Zero Matter other than the freakish things it does to Wilkes and Frost. And then it just goes back where it came from in the end. Rumor has it it's supposed to tie into the Doctor Strange film, but that's to be determined as of now. And lastly, I didn't really like the lack of Captain America references. I'm sure they wanted Peggy to move on and be her own woman and find love again, but this is still set only about 2 years after Steve's alleged death. Granted, I wouldn't expect Peggy still pining over Steve come 1954, but they could have just thrown a reference or two in there for good measure. While I can't say I expected this show to run 7 or 8 seasons, I do think there is more to say with Peggy Carter, and hopefully the powers that be find a way to tell more of her story in the future. I'm giving Agent Carter Season 2 4.5 stars out of 5. Number 2. Supergirl. The Maid of Might takes flight in her first ever TV series. The series starts with Kara's origin on Krypton. No mention is made of Argo City, which, in the original Silver Age telling of the story, survived Krypton's explosion. In this version, however, presumably her family perished with the rest of Krypton. Kara is a preteen and is sent to Earth to watch over her cousin Kal-El, who is only a baby at this point. It's kind of a tall order to send a 13-year-old alone on a strange new world to look after an infant. The series' carnal sin seems to be laying the girl power theme incredibly thick. It might have been most overpowering in the fact that Kara's dad, Zor-El, is barely seen or mentioned in favor of her mother, Allura. I don't mind Allura getting some more prestige than usual, but it doesn't really need to be at the expense of Zor-El, does it? Kara's ship takes a detour into the Phantom Zone and pulls the prison Fort Roz to Earth. During her voyage to Earth, a time lapse in the Phantom Zone causes her to not age, while Superman has grown to adulthood by the time she lands. He takes her to live with the Danvers. I guess Ma and Pa Kent are dead at this point. They're played by the original Supergirl, Helen Slater, and former TV Superman, Dean Cain. They raise her along with their daughter, Alex. We really only get a crash course in Kara's history on Krypton. The pilot could have seriously benefited from a 2-hour length. Kara works for Cat Grant, who routinely mispronounces her name. Her function seems to be to give Kara the right lesson she needs, albeit in an insulting and backhanded type of way. Kara makes her first public display of her powers when she saves Alex from a plane crash, just like Superman's first amazing feat, as we are told by Jimmy Olsen. She embarks on a career in crime fighting, taking, and more often rejecting, fashion advice by her pal Win. The costume they settle on is reasonably faithful to her Silver Age costume, yet inexplicably the yellow portion of the S-shield is omitted. I also have to wince at the laughably bad idea of putting dark stockings on her. Are they durable Kryptonian nylons, resistant to runs? The real-life reason is because the SJWs running the show couldn't risk any of the icky men in the audience getting a thrill from seeing her bare legs. It makes even less sense when you consider Kara is working in the office wearing short dresses all the time. I guess a superhero costume is supposed to be inherently provocative or something? But that's a rant to be continued at a later time. It's revealed that her sister Alex works for some paranormal bureau called the DEO, which kind of reminded me of the latter seasons of Superboy. The DEO is led by Hank Henshaw, played by BBC America's Robin Hood's reimagined Friar Tuck actor, David Harewood. Melissa Benoist really hits a home run with Kara/Supergirl. She's really the perfect embodiment of the character. She's adorable, virtuous, optimistic, and any other of the classic attributes one associates with the Maid of Might. I didn't really care for this new and improved Jimmy Olsen. Virtually nothing about him is in common with the classic comic book version of Jimmy, which Weird Al would aptly describe as white and nerdy. Mehcad Brooks does a fine job, but I prefer to think of him as a completely new character named James that just happens to be a photographer and has some vague history as Superman's friend. He does have Superman's signal watch, which is a nice touch. He and Kara eventually take a trip to the Fortress of Solitude, which I'd have preferred Superman be involved in. Ironically, or perhaps it was by design, much like the original Supergirl movie, Jimmy is dating Lucy Lane, Lois's little sis. She begins as a rival to Kara for Jimmy's affection before becoming a full-fledged ally by the end. The show's de facto Lex Luthor is one Max Lord, who tries his hand at outwitting Supergirl for much of the early goings. Despite the trappings of a poor man's Luthor, he's actually quite compelling. He has a certain charm about him, and it's not unreasonable when Alex seems to take a shine to him. One of the more impressive villains is Superman baddie Livewire, where, much like her cartoon counterpart, she's a shock jock who is given the power to shock with electricity. I like the way she's realized visually, but whose bright idea was to give her black contact lenses? Remove them at once. As most people learned, the female empowerment was very heavy-handed in the early half of the season. The Supergirl naming scene is painfully longer than necessary. Rather than just have Supergirl own the name, they seem to fear rankling feminists and make a bigger deal apologizing for it than need be. The show's low point, in my opinion, is the Red Tornado episode, where essentially everyone treats everyone else like crap for the whole show. Supergirl learns from Kat that it's basically alright to take your frustrations out on someone of less significance than you, eventually leading her to unleash all her pent-up fury on Red Tornado, destroying him, despite his becoming a sentient being as we're told by that point. It's ultimately a sad misuse and waste of a great Justice League character. The season's big baddie is revealed to be Kara's aunt, who not only survived the destruction of Krypton and the Phantom Zone, but is apparently Alora's twin sister. She starts out the season being ruthless and willing to kill Kara without hesitation. Yet after the first couple episodes, they soften her character considerably, making her objective not to kill Kara, but to sway her to her cause of conquering the Earth. A coup she apparently already tried without success on Krypton, leading Alora to sentence her to the Phantom Zone. Astra's lieutenant is her husband Non. Yes, like that Non from the Donner films. This version, however, has nothing in common with that version. Kara doesn't have a particularly close relationship with Non, hardly even identifying him as her uncle. Eventually, it's revealed that Hank has a secret of his own, though it's not what the sisters think. Jeremiah Danvers went missing while last in Hank's company, leading the two to suspect him of foul play. But in reality, he's actually J'onn J'onzz, DC's Martian Manhunter. Several viewers suspected the character of being Cyborg Superman, as the character's name Hank Henshaw would suggest. But having another DC B-list hero on the show was a pretty bold move, and effective too. After J'onn tells of his daughter's deaths on Mars, it's really nice to see how he views the sisters as his own adopted family. J'onn's look is realized very well, yet you can tell budget prevents him from appearing in his true form for more than a few seconds at a time. His powers come in handy, not the least of which happens at the mid-season point where Kat suspects Kara of being Supergirl. The resolution of the dilemma is delightfully Silver Age, as J'onn impersonates Supergirl in front of Kara and Kat. Can I also say just how great it is to have the secret identity thing taken on faith? It's very old school. Glasses are enough to protect her secret, while Flash and Arrow overkill on the concept with voice modulators and face blurring at super speed. Here they expect the audience to buy the concept as is, and as it has been for 3/4 of a century at this point. The show really picks up after the mid-season break. Most shows tend to struggle to find their footing during the first half of their first season, so it's not so unusual here. The feminist platitudes get dialed back considerably, and the stories become more ambitious and comic book oriented. Supergirl tangles with a few of Superman's classic foes this season, most notably Toyman. Frankly, I was a bit disappointed at this incarnation. I was hoping for a wacky, zany, trickster-style character, but he turns out to be Wynn's dad and sort of a run-of-the-mill crazy guy without any colorful trappings. The somber effect he has on Wynn isn't a barrel of laughs either. Now, I really like the dynamic between Kara, Jimmy, and Wynn. They both support her, both have feelings for her, and both pretty much suppress those feelings for her. Yet, despite Wynn and Jimmy having some moments of rivalry that mostly plays for laughs, they genuinely seem to get on as friends. No drama between the two. At this point, Wynn voices his love for Kara, and you really feel for the guy. He's risking it all for the chance with a goddess he'll probably never get. Kara doesn't respond quite in kind. But the problem with the relationship is one common to the CW shows where they insist on keeping their destined pair together. Felicity, Felicity, Felicity. Don't argue, Black Canary's dead, it's destiny. Iris, Iris, Iris. Forget how great Barry was with Patty, it's destiny. And now in this case, it's Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy. Forget he already has a hot girlfriend of his own, it's destiny. But I think why it smarts so much here, though, is that I'm guessing many of us identify with Wynn as the shy, nerdy guy. I'd really like to pull for him to get together with her, but the showrunners quickly get past Wynn's romantic overture and set him out with a future baddie. More on that later. And from the little revealed about next season, it doesn't sound as if they intend to go back to it. Why is it that the Olicity shippers have the pull to get Ollie set up with the nerdy girl, yet here Kara needs to end up with the underwear model? I mean, fair's fair after all. Jean's backstory gets special attention in an episode where he faces a white Martian, his race's natural enemy. In the meantime, Kara reunites Kat with her estranged son Adam, played coincidentally by Melissa's real-life husband, Blake Jenner. Little nepotiz. This gives Callista Flockhart a good opportunity to show a little more depth with Kat. The season really kicks into gear at this point with Max Lord creating a Supergirl Bizarro, a clone of sorts that has all the powers of Supergirl, but in reverse. Kara manages to defeat her both with strength as well as compassion. Next up, another strong outing with For the Girl Who Has Everything, a version based on the popular Alan Moore Superman story For the Man Who Has Everything. In this version, Non sends a Black Mercy which attaches itself to Kara, projecting her into her perfect fantasy. She returns to her life on Krypton as if she never left. Her parents are still alive, Astra isn't evil, and a young kid by the name of Kal-El comes over to play. This story actually works better for Supergirl than it does for Superman, as the show plays up the fact that Kara actually has memories of Krypton, having lived there for 13 years, where Clark really has no memory of the place and might just as well have been born on Earth. Kara actually knows what she lost when Krypton blew up. I only wish the episode was a two-parter. It would have been nice to spend more time on Krypton and perhaps meet Jor-El and Lara. I doubt many more such opportunities to visit the place will afford themselves in the future. In a humorous subplot, Hank attempts to cover for Kara at Catco by imitating her. Eventually, Supergirl goes off to face Non, while Alex and Jean face Astra. In a pretty cool battle between Astra and the Manhunter, Alex kills her. Hank, however, takes the fall with Kara, claiming the kill as his own for a time, which drives a wedge between the two until Alex comes clean. It's great just how they take pains to show Kara's belief that killing is never an option. This is classic Superman theology at work. Would that our big screen version of DC's Big Three have the same convictions. Another of Superman's classic foes, the Master Jailer, makes an appearance. In this case, though, he's realized as an alien with advanced tech that used to be a jailer on Fort Roz. Despite these alterations, I enjoyed the actor and costume design. Master Jailer has ever been one of Soup's unsung villains, but I've always liked him, and hopefully they'll endeavor to use him again in the future. Probably the single best episode in the season is the Red Kryptonite episode, where Max Lord's supposed noble attempt at making synthetic kryptonite to use against Non goes horribly wrong, affecting Supergirl by turning her evil. He must have used tar. The Superman 3 comparisons don't end there, however. There's a hilarious scene of Supergirl flicking peanuts at bottles in a bar, shattering them. It's a great recreation of the scene in Superman 3. The episode also has much to thank Spider-Man 3 for as well, as Kara rats out her unscrupulous rival, as well as Wynn's new girlfriend, Siobhan, causing her to be fired, and having a devastating conversation with Alex. In the end, Hank reveals himself as the Martian Manhunter to subdue Kara long enough for Alex to blast her with Max's cannon cure-all, and gives himself up to the DEO. Melissa Benoist just kills it in this episode, not only as the evil Supergirl, but once the veil of evil is lifted and she returns to normal, she gives just a heartbreaking performance. The only thing that could have made the episode better was, again, if they would have made it a two-parter. Here, Supergirl throws Kat off a roof, and naturally catches her to prove a point, and suddenly the whole town doesn't trust her, and the SWAT teams are out using live ammo to get her. They could have built it up a bit more, but the show being on CBS felt like it was existing on borrowed time already. They couldn't spare the great episodes in the limited time they had, so one gets the sense they're throwing all their good ideas into this season, just hoping it gets popular enough to get a second season at all. Hank and Alex are arrested and are to be taken to Cadmus. Kara trusts her secret to Lucy, who ends up becoming the new head of the DEO. The two break Hank and Alex free. During a mind meld, Jean learns Jeremiah Danvers is still alive, leading to the season's main cliffhanger. Fans' hopes were realized when The Flash made a jaunt from CW over to CBS to join Supergirl for an episode. It was really fun to see the two together, and Grant Gustin and Melissa Benoist have a spectacular rapport. The episode does have the same problems as the Arrow-Flash crossover, where they choose now, of all times, to focus on the hero's love life. I question Barry's rather careless nature with his secret identity, despite being on a parallel world. And of course they do the cutesy cliche that Kat can figure out Barry's the Flash, despite being oblivious to Kara. We're also treated to a villain team-up. The villains in this case being Siobhan, Kara's Catco rival turned Silver Banshee, and the returning Livewire. At this point, National City still doesn't trust Kara, so the resolution of the story has the citizens, aided by some firemen, actually defeating the villains to protect Supergirl. It's a nice gesture and all, but it's kind of weak sauce as a resolution for what was at least then touted as a once-in-a-lifetime superhero team-up. In the end, the two race to break Flash back through the barrier, sending him back home. Though, awkwardly, Supergirl can never know if he was successful. And over on The Flash, Barry inexplicably says nothing about this little excursion. Smallville's Supergirl actress Laura Vandervoot joins the cast as Brainiac 8, aka Indigo. She allies herself with Non. Non seeks to fulfill Astra's grand plan called Myriad. He succeeds in getting all of National City under his sway, by making all humans connected in some kind of hive mentality. To serve his will, all for the sake of the greater good. Kara goes to the Fortress of Solitude to seek out Superman, but he's not at home attending to some business off-world. When he returns, he's also quickly swayed and put out of action. Kat and Max are the only ones beside Kara to retain their free will, due to an invention of Max's. Alex and Jean abandon their Cadmus side mission and return to help Supergirl, but Alex is soon used as a pawn of Non to battle Supergirl in a kryptonite-powered suit. Eventually, in a nice bit of symbolism, Alex's mom, played by Helen Slater, the original Supergirl, comes to the rescue and saves our current Supergirl. Long story short, Supergirl broadcasts a message of hope that wakes everyone from their hive mind. It's great that the showrunners seem to have gone out of their way to emphasize the fact that Superman, and by extension Supergirl, are supposed to be seen as symbols of hope and optimism. Something that's been sadly lacking in our current big-screen adaptation of Superman. Much has been made of the fact Superman isn't seen in the season, something they apparently intend to rectify next season. But I think it was handled pretty well. This is supposed to be Kara's story. At the end of the day, it's her show. And having Superman front and center every time a crisis occurs is a disservice to her. To their credit, they also get the voice of Superman right, so to speak. Whenever he's texting Kara, it does actually feel like you're reading what the honest-to-goodness Superman would be saying. It's nice to know the Man of Steel will be actually appearing next season, and that he's in competent hands. At Indigo's behest, Non then turns his plans towards killing all the humans in Shades of X-Men 2. Supergirl and Martian Manhunter take off to face them in what is thought to be a suicide mission. In another amusing tribute to the original film, Non's MacGuffin is the Omega Hedron. Supergirl is rescued from drifting off in space by Alex, who flies Kara's original pod. Frankly, I never liked the real-life connotations of Sup not being able to breathe in space, so I'd have preferred they not done so here. Hank is reinstated as head of the DEO, and Kara is given a promotion by Kat and a new office. It comes at the right time, as Callista Flockhart will be having a reduced role next season. So in the final analysis, it was a very strong season that took a while to find its footing, but Melissa Benoist is amazing as Supergirl. The rest of the cast is very strong, and after about the mid-season point, they minimalized the feminist trapping significantly, focusing on a very Silver Age-feeling theme for the show. If they can keep that flavor going now that they're taking the show to the CW, the Maid of Might should be soaring high for a long time to come. I'm giving Supergirl Season 1 4.5 stars out of 5. And the #1 show of 2016? The Flash, Season 2. As we pick up the action, it's 6 months hence from the end of last season. Barry has abandoned his team to go it alone. In a flashback, we're shown that in order to save Flash from the Singularity, Ronnie Raymond and Dr. Stein become Firestorm. However, despite saving Barry, Ronnie is destroyed, leaving Martin the sole survivor. It seems an odd contrivance designed to give Robbie Amell a hasty exit from the show. He does return for a guest spot later, but his run as Firestorm is over, which is disappointing as I really liked the rapport he had with Victor Garber's Dr. Stein. But more on that later. Flash is due to get the key to the city from Mayor Bellows, but Barry is reluctant as it's really Eddie Thawne's sacrifice that saved the day. The first episode continues to tie up last season's pesky loose ends, when Barry receives Dr. Wells, aka Eobard Thawne's, recorded confession that will finally free his dad from prison. It's actually a touching moment where Barry and Caitlin watch the video together. I've always liked Barry with Caitlin, but that ship has pretty much sailed at this point. Yet again, as in the case of Amell, John Wesley Shipp's Henry Allen is hastily written out of the show, as he cites his presence will hold Barry back from becoming the hero he should be. Eventually, the team reunites to battle a series of metahumans that are doppelgangers from another Earth. To help them understand the situation, enter Jay Garrick, the Flash of Earth 2, who claims a powerful speedster named Zoom has stolen his speed and trapped him on their Earth. Zoom intends to steal Barry's speed and add it to his own. While initially distrustful of Jay, Barry soon takes guidance from him as they plan to take down Zoom. Captain Cold makes his pre-rescue appearance with the Flash. This time, he's working for his ratbag of an old man who put a bomb in his daughter's neck to ensure Cold's cooperation. Despite Cold and Heatwave getting a lot of face time on Legends of Tomorrow, this is the only appearance of Golden Glider this season. She's sorely missed, and I hope that they find a way to incorporate her into the show or any of the DCCW shows next season. Dr. Stein sticks around Star Labs for much of the early half of the season, making up for the temporary lack of a Harrison Wells. He falls ill since apparently he needs to periodically merge with a counterpart as not to explode. And since Ronnie is no longer living, the call goes out to find a replacement. Enter Jefferson Jackson, one-time aspiring football player, now full-time mechanic. The pair don't get too much of a chance for development here, but they are quickly spun off into Legends of Tomorrow. I was a big fan of the Stein-Raymond pairing, but Jax eventually grew on me. His youthful enthusiasm and interaction with Stein is one of Legends of Tomorrow's strong points. Unfortunately, he had to wait for Legends of Tomorrow to get the comic-accurate costume. The mystery of Iris' mom is brought to bear this season. Joe's wife Francine reappears telling them that she's dying from McGregor syndrome. She's an ex-drug abuser and abandoned her family when Iris was young. This storyline could have been a bit overbearing in the wrong hands, such as Arrow, I dare say. But it's played out very naturally here. Everyone acts as you would normally expect that they would. And Jesse and Candace give some very strong performances during the storyline. One of the improvements from last season is with Iris. Last season she was overplayed with very little substance. But here, her career is taking off on its own, and she has her own little subplot that's moderately interesting. As for Barry, he meets Joe's new partner, the perennially cute and effervescent Patty Spivot. She's actually a good match with Barry, far better than both Iris and Linda, and it's fun to see them together. Enter Harrison Wells, Earth 2 Harrison Wells to be exact. It's great how they found such a unique way of keeping Tom Cavanaugh on the show. His relationship with Cisco is hilarious, and almost the opposite that it was between Cisco and Thawne. Wells promises to help Barry defeat Zoom, which leads to a conflict between mentors, as Jay thinks Barry is unready to take on Zoom, while Harry brands Jay a coward. Jay eventually backs out of the team, which upsets Caitlin most of all, who has become smitten with him in the interim. Cisco's vibe powers come to the surface during the season. Cisco is initially hesitant about using them and keeps them a secret from the team, until Harry lets the cat out of the bag. There's some real funny scenes of Cisco trying to vibe from Harry. When he eventually does, it's learned that Zoom is holding Harry's pretty daughter Jessie hostage. Linda Park returns for a fun story arc, as her evil doppelganger, which happens to be Dr. Light, comes to Earth looking to kill the Flash. After she escapes, Linda takes her place in a daring attempt to catch Zoom. The plan doesn't quite work out, and Zoom takes the Flash on in battle for the first time, beating him severely, before parading him around Central City like some kind of a perverse trophy. When Barry wakes up, he finds that he's paralyzed from the waist down. Ironically, this puts him into Wells Thawne's wheelchair. In Shades of Rocky 3, Barry needs to confront his fear of Zoom with the aid of guest-starring John Wesley Shipp. Meanwhile, Grodd returns and kidnaps Caitlin. A brave ruse by Harry impersonating the Reverse Flash, and the Flash's knockout punch sends Grodd to Earth 2's Gorilla City. Then the traditional Yuletide episode marks the return of Mark Hamill as the Trickster. Weather Wizard breaks both he and Captain Cold out of Iron Heights for another shot at the Flash. Cold bows out, preferring to join the crew of the Wave Rider over on Legends of Tomorrow. Meanwhile, Patty tries to kill Weather Wizard in revenge for his murdering her father. The Flash manages to convince her otherwise, and the two rogues are captured and returned to jail. During all this, Iris drops the news that Francine has a son, whom Joe didn't even know he had. Again, this could have been pretty overbearing in the wrong hands, but it's acted and handled extremely well. Enter Wally West, and to be honest, Wally's introduction is one of the season's weaker elements. Wally is pretty much an angry young man who has a giant chip on his shoulder. He's kind of in the mold of Chris O'Donnell's Robin, and I generally like Chris O'Donnell's Robin. Wally has a need for speed and drag races for money to pay his mom's hospital bills. Not unlike Batgirl in Batman and Robin, so there's also that. Eventually, Francine dies off screen, which seems a little odd to be honest. But it's actually a benefit to not have to wring even more angst out of the show this season than need be. Flash's oldest villain, the Turtle, makes his first and last appearance. Nice to see them making full use of Flash's extensive rogues gallery. And the Turtle is Flash's power opposite, where he can slow the Flash's speed down considerably. Wells ends up killing Turtle, though, in an attempt to steal his power. Kind of a waste of an intriguing villain. Reverse Flash makes a return trip from the future. Turns out he's a time remnant. This was another of the weaker elements of the season. The time remnant is a bit of a convoluted plot device, but more on that later. Barry sends Thawne back to the future in order to save Cisco from disappearing from existence. These pesky time paradoxes. You never know where they're going to strike, or who. Patty Spivet's chapter closes around here. It's kind of a shame too, as I really grew to like her. They played very heavily into the classic hero motif where Barry struggles to keep his secret while dating her, and spends endless time making up excuses for ditching her to become the Flash. I was glad to see that Barry eventually heeds Wells' advice to keep Patty in the dark for her own safety. Even when Patty eventually decides to leave Central City and pretty much figures out Barry's secret, he keeps his secret to the end. Classic superhero stuff right there. Zoom holds Wells' daughter Jessie prisoner on Earth 2 to ensure his cooperation in stealing the Flash's speed. After initially stealing a small bit of the Flash's speed, Wells comes clean that he has no choice but to betray Barry for the sake of Jessie's safety. Team Flash is not very forgiving of Harry, but I was glad to see that they kept Barry very much in character. He offers to go to Earth 2 to save Jessie and defeat Zoom on his own turf. This leads to one of the most enjoyable arcs of the season, where Barry, Harry, and Cisco travel to Earth 2. Barry takes the place of his nerdy doppelganger, and Grant Gustin's performance is hilarious. He's easily the most talented dramatic actor on any of these shows, but he also has a great flair for comedy as well. Everything is topsy-turvy on Earth 2. Joe is a lounge singer, while Iris is a cop, and her partner is Deadshot, who humorously couldn't hit a target if it were 2 feet in front of him. Barry meets Earth 2's Caitlin Snow, who just happens to be Killer Frost. You can tell Danielle Panabaker is having a lot of fun with the role, and her appearance is definitely worth the wait. She and her boyfriend Earth 2 Ronnie Raymond, aka Deathstorm, the evil version of Firestorm, are Zoom's enforcers. Another fun bit has Cisco meeting his evil counterpart, Reverb, who is a cold, calculating villain that offers Cisco to join him. As the Flash attempts to save his friends, Deathstorm and Reverb try to kill him. This goes against Zoom's wishes and he kills them both. Robbie Amell gets killed twice this season for those of you keeping score at home. It's more of a waste with Reverb's death, however. I could easily see him as a recurring villain. It seems a recurring theme this season that all the good villains end up getting killed off. Barry is taken prisoner by Zoom and held in the same dungeon as Jessie and a mysterious man in a mask who tries to communicate with them by tapping on the glass of his cell in code. The pair can only get one word from him, however, J, as in Jay Garrick. Back on Earth 1, Jay Garrick has returned and is called upon to save Central City in Barry's absence. Caitlin creates Velocity 9, which gives him enough speed to avert certain crises created by Geomancer, who has the power to cause earthquakes. He's a decidedly kooky villain that feels like he was torn straight out of the 90s show, so needless to say, I enjoy the character quite a bit. Back on Earth 2, Cisco succeeds in convincing Killer Frost to lead them to Zoom's lair, where they free Barry and Jessie. Before the Mystery Man can be freed, Zoom returns and Frost buys them enough time to escape by attacking Zoom. As the group makes their way back through the only remaining portal to Earth 1, Zoom kills Jay. It's not long until Team Flash realized that Zoom was somehow Jay Garrick. While searching for a solution to the problem of defeating Zoom, there are a few filler episodes that have various levels of success. The first of which is the long-awaited return of King Shark, who made a cameo earlier in the season. Lila and Diggle make a welcome guest appearance. The CGI for King Shark is very impressive, and it's a fun little episode. Next up, Flash takes on Trajectory, a female scientist turned thief and thrill seeker who takes Velocity 9 like a junkie. The episode is most notable as Barry wrestles with the temptation to take Velocity 9 himself as a shortcut. This ain't pro sports, after all. No performance enhancer testing involved in the superhero gig, but Barry heeds Wells' advice and decides to get faster the old-fashioned way. Meanwhile, Jessie learns her dad killed the turtle and decides to head out on her own. Barry then decides to head back in time to take the place of his past self and ask the advice of the disguised Thawne. I'll take the time now to mention how cool it is to see that Barry has the classic emblem with the white backing on his costume this year. I figured fairly early on the reason for the red emblem last year was so that viewers wouldn't get confused with all the potential time travel shenanigans that were afoot which Flash is which. The episode in question that is relived is the Pied Piper episode of last season. Thawne figures out fairly early on that Barry is from the future since he brought along with him a time wraith, which looks like a reject from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, along with Angry Young Wally and the Time Remnant concept, this is the third element introduced this season that I'm not too crazy about. Thawne informs that the Time Wraith tries to destroy speedsters that try to disrupt the timeline. It hasn't come after him since he, quote-unquote, knows what he's doing. It's a fairly esoteric concept, and given all the time travel that goes on in The Flash, to say nothing of Legends of Tomorrow, it seems like a hastily thrown-in contrivance. Another thing that bugs me about the episode is just how greatly Barry ends up changing the timeline with no real ramifications. Pied Piper is now a friend of Team Flash due to Barry's interference. This is most disappointing to me since I thought Piper was a brilliant nemesis for Cisco last season. At the very least, it was good to see Eddie again as Barry spares a few moments to bring Iris back a video he recorded of Eddie during his trip to the past. The season really ramps up for the final stretch as we learn Zoom's backstory. He's a serial killer named Hunter Zolomon, who was traumatized as a child after witnessing his father kill his mother. This really cements Zoom as Barry's dark opposite. They both went through a similar tragedy, only to come out of it to become two very different people. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a dark opposite villain, and Zoom is highly effective in that role. Zoom was able to kill Jay by killing his own Time Remnant, and yes, that still won't be the last time we mention the Time Remnant. Barry and Cisco lure Zoom back to Earth-1 via Cisco's emerging vibe powers. The trap backfires, however, and Zoom holds Wally hostage, offering him in trade for Flash's speed. Barry agrees to this and gives up his powers to Zoom. It sort of echoes the ending of Superman 2 in a way, where the hero appears to be utterly defeated by the villain. Since Superman 2 is one of my favorite films, that's probably another reason why I enjoyed this episode so much. Zoom attempts to kill Barry, but Caitlin's pleas stop Zoom and he captures her, taking her back to his lair on Earth-2. While there, she comes across the imprisoned killer Frost. Frost makes a deal to help her escape once freed. She of course tries to double-cross Caitlin before Zoom reappears, killing Frost. Again, big waste of a cool Earth-2 villain that should have reoccurred several times in the future. Obviously, with the Flashpoint Paradox being a big part of Season 3, I think it's safe to say we'll see Frost again before long, but it's still disappointing. I'm glad Caitlin actually gets a fair bit of focus in this back half of the season. Not unlike Emily Bitt Rickards, Danielle Panabaker is really at her best in the funny, quirky mode, but to her credit, I feel she rises to the occasion here in a fairly dramatic role this season. Barry has trouble adjusting to his loss of powers and has to face a super strong villain named Griffin Grey without his speed. He eventually defeats Grey by making him exert his strength, as the villain ages every time he uses his super strength until he just keels over and dies. In addition to Grey, the Flash seems to kill an inordinate amount of villains this season, starting with Atom Smasher in the first episode, continuing on in the second with Speed Demon. Not for nothing, but Barry's supposed to be the lighthearted superhero. I think he dropped more bodies than Arrow this season. Wells ends up being reunited with Jesse, and Wally becomes inspired by the Flash's great sacrifice on his behalf, becoming a hero in the making. Zoom continues his reign of terror by attempting his takeover of Earth-1. He sends Cisco's brother's doppelganger Rupture. After he fails, Zoom kills several police officers and takes over the Central City Police Station, imprisoning Caitlin there. When all looks dire, Barry brings his dad back to Star Labs, allegedly for good, and Wells tries to convince Barry to allow him to recreate the accident that made him the Flash. It's a very epic moment that is a little nod to the Flashpoint Paradox story. The experiment doesn't go as planned, and Barry is turned into energy that hits Wally and Jesse. Turns out that Barry has gone to the Speed Force, and the Speed Force turns out to be sentient, and takes the form of Barry's loved ones, including his mother. Barry can't receive his powers and return to the real world again unless he catches an elusive shadowy figure that outruns him. Again, this is a fairly esoteric concept that I could do without. This is probably all familiar to comic readers that have closely followed the books for many years, but for me, it's an unnecessary addition, an overall head-scratcher. Eventually, Barry catches the shadowy figure and returns at Iris' behest. And while I really enjoyed Iris this year, this is where they started to lose me with the whole Iris is Barry's destiny business again. I get that Iris was Barry's wife in the comics, but again, their relationship in the show is problematic to say the least. The show tries to have it both ways. On the one hand, they play up Barry and Joe being like father and son, and they're the closest of the close, and don't get me wrong, I love that relationship between them and wouldn't want them to change it. But you can't have Joe as Barry's father and then act like, well, Iris is nothing like a sister to Barry. They obviously aren't related by blood, so it's all good. It just doesn't work that way. Try as they may, the show can't have it both ways. You can't have Joe being Barry's foster father without Iris being his foster sister. It just feels odd playing it the way they are. Anyway, as the season winds down, Katie Cassidy returns, this time as Black Canary's doppelganger, Black Siren. In an amusing gambit, Cisco and Caitlin, who was released by Zoom, take the guise of Reverb and Killer Frost to stall Black Siren off, while Barry uses Wells and Cisco's device that succeeds in rendering all the Earth 2 villains unconscious. Zoom, meanwhile, escapes back to Earth 2. Amanda Pays returns again this season as Tina McGee. It's cool seeing Flash save her again for the first time in years. She's in on the Flash's secret, too, which means hopefully she'll have more regular appearances next season. It was also a treat to have Pays and Ship sharing the screen for the first time in decades as well. There's even a hint of a romance between Henry and Tina. Well, that is until Zoom returns and kills Henry. Yes, tragically, Zoom kills Henry in front of Barry to cement the parallels between them, and to tempt Barry to the dark side to prove he could just as easily have become Zoom. Barry naturally wants to kill Zoom, but Zoom challenges Barry to a race to prove for all time who is the fastest man alive. This really appealed to me. Zoom isn't satisfied to be the ruler of worlds, but he must prove to be the fastest. That's of tantamount importance to him. Zoom does have another motive, however. The race will generate the power for his device to destroy all worlds in the multiverse but Earth 1. Team Flash trap Barry in the pipeline for his own good, fearing revenge will cloud his judgment, and they plan to trap Zoom themselves. Naturally, the plan goes south and Joe is captured. Wally frees Barry, who agrees to the race. In the end, Barry creates a time remnant that frees Joe and destroys Zoom's machine, while the real Barry fights Zoom. Barry's remnant burns himself out, but not before summoning time wraiths that disfigure Zoom and carry him off to who knows where. As almost an afterthought, the mysterious man in the Iron Mask is saved and joins them on Earth 1, where lo and behold, he turns out to be the original Jay Garrick whom Zoom was impersonating. It was great to see Ship in a Flash suit again. That's probably the closest we'll have of him reprising the role of the Flash. Of course, Jay is the role many of us were hoping he'd play all along, but it was a stroke of genius giving Ship 2 choice roles for the price of 1. Jay takes Harry and Jesse back to Earth 2, and Barry ends the season by going back and preventing his mother's murder, signaling next season's version of the Flashpoint paradox. In conclusion, I really enjoyed this season, even more than last season, which is no small feat. There were a few speed bumps. Such things like the time wraiths and time remnants were a little too inside baseball for fans like me who are not entirely familiar with the concepts of the comics, but there was so much to enjoy here. Iris being a likable character, Caitlin getting some good character development, Tom Cavanaugh getting to put a new spin on Harrison Wells. His banter with Cisco was a lot of fun. John Wesley Shipp emerging as the Jay Garrick Flash. Joe got a great storyline, and after a rocky start, I really liked the kid that played Wally. Zoom was appropriately menacing and an entertaining villain in his own right, and Barry got put through the emotional ringer. A great season overall. I'm giving The Flash Season 2 5 stars out of 5. Thank you for joining me for this exhaustive rundown of the 2015-2016 season of superhero television, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. This is Johnnie Torch reminding you, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.